It is a lot of people, but it goes back to mechanisms because of, since 9/11, the difficulty of crossing the border where it was sort of benign neglect before. Now enforcement makes it very difficult to make the decision to go back, and then the risk of return. Also the cost of doing this, plus now the honest worker is intermingled with the drug dealer, with the people trafficker. All of these things have changed to what was traditional. On the other hand, I think we need to mention that in the current market, where the American economy is begging for workers, is in agriculture. A recent report by the AP indicates that the agricultural community cannot find workers, period. They can get one American when they need a few hundred. And this is where a broken system is in. The HB visa for agricultural workers from Mexico has no limitation. People think that there's a limit number of visas, that's for semi-skilled workers. There is no limit in the number of agricultural workers that come from Mexico legally, but there is no way to connect the agricultural industry with the workers in Mexico to actually being able to come without having to pay the $2,000 to $5,000 risk fee and actually benefit everybody. So part of the discussion here needs to include what mechanisms both the private sector, which is very quiet, and both governments can do to at least alleviate one part of the process.
But in the 21st century, where you can take a cell phone out of your pocket and be on the phone from Florida or South Carolina to your hometown in Mexico in a matter of seconds, when you can disappear into new barrios that have grown up around the country. It's not unusual to be Mexican in much of America anymore. Is it as easy to bring people with the understanding that they're going to go home after the crops are in? Or once you open that door, are you fated to just have a certain amount of shrinkage? Are people going to play by the rules with an agricultural contingent workforce?
I think we will find that there's a model in the state of Nuevo León, in Monterrey, where they issue the temporary visas, the majority that are issued in Mexico. The return rate is 98% once they come in with proper papers. There are there's a lady in Colorado that is lacking workers, that is proposing what she calls a red card solution. But as long as the worker knows that it's a temporary permit and they can come and go freely, most of them do it. The people that the ambassador mentioned that overstayed their visa came as students, as tourists, with other types of visas. But the temporary worker visa, most of the time is respected because there's that comfort to know you can work here and go home to your family.
And both countries have an interest in making that work, don't they?
I think so. And in the year 2001, I was part of the negotiation with the Mexican government on immigration, and one of the solutions that was being considered was a temporary worker program. And we got pretty far advanced into the process until 9/11, of course, and that kind of derailed everything. But I think we need to look at mechanisms like that, some temporary worker solutions.
Is that going to be enough? Yes, agriculture has needs, you know pretty much every year when your peaches are going to be ready to pick. Mm-hmm. But needs are not as easy to project in other industries, and the need for workers is steady as opposed to seasonal.
That's right. But there's no perfect system, but we need to start a dialogue to at least make a dent into the problem.
Would you say that both sides are interested in doing that?
Well, the mood here has changed quite a bit since 9/11. The concern after 9/11 was protect our borders first. But I think now there may be, the American people may be ready to look at solutions that stem the flow of illegal immigration. And perhaps after this election, we'll be ready to at least consider some new approaches.
The interesting thing, if you look at the conditions in Upper Manhattan, on the Southwest Side in Chicago, in cities along the border, there are a lot of people living in terrible conditions in the United States. And if the idea was to improve your lot in life and take better care of your family, if you're sending less money home, if you're lonely, if you're separated from your wife and kids, if your work is becoming more sporadic, there seems to be a kind of lag. You're willing to put up with almost anything to stay, as the Colonel suggests, because you don't know if you're going to be able to get back when things are better. But people are willing to put up with a lot here, Maureen.
And I think that historically has been the case. You're looking at Latin American immigrants, Chinese immigrants originally, people living, 20 people in one house. I think being willing to wait it out, try to see if things will improve, and I think in the end there are certainly decisions made by certain migrants to return home thinking things aren't getting any better in the United States, I might as well try my luck back in Mexico or back in Central America. But I think it is, again, that long-term vision of, I made the risk, I paid to come up here in a lot of cases, I need to try to wait it out and see if I can, make a living and make a better life here. I think what the ambassador was saying about, country interest, Mexico certainly has an interest in the United States looking more at its immigration system between the agricultural issue, but I think obviously looking at when President Calderon was here in May and his speech before the U.S. Congress, certainly calling on Congress to address more the immigration issue, because it's not just looking at the agriculture, it's like the larger broken system that we do have.
A lot of people, we extol previous generations of immigrants and we praise them and we love them and we paint that era in a kind of golden light. A lot of people went back to Ireland, to Italy. When you came for fear of your life or a kind of ethno-religious persecution, for instance, in the western parts of the Russian Empire, when Jews poured out of there, they didn't really have any place to go back to. But places where you could just get on a boat and go back home, people don't realize how many immigrants gave New York a try and then went home. And it's maybe it would be a good thing for us to remember and a good part of our current family arguments about how all this works.
Even,
Well, I was just going to say that with the Italian and Irish immigrants in particular, about a third went home, about a third of Italians went home in the early part of the 20th century, and that was at a time when transportation costs were a lot higher than they are now. And we've been saying earlier, that's very much been the pattern of Mexican, especially Mexican, but also Central American migration to the U.S. up through the 1980s, that it was very seasonal and that most unauthorized immigrants came for 6 or 9 months and went home. And since we've put so much enforcement at the border, which has raised the cost of entry, the number one thing that we observe is not that it prevents people from coming because they're able to come, maybe on a couple of attempts, but that it encourages them to stay because it's become so much more costly. So that seasonal migration has really been interrupted.
So does that hardening of the border make it more likely that you're going to try to get your wife or girlfriend up here?
Yeah, we've certainly seen that. It used to be overwhelmingly a young, single male population, and now the unauthorized population consists mostly of families and of mixed status families, couples who have U.S. citizen children. But that phenomenon is really just since the 80s and 90s, and most demographers link it very closely to that enhanced enforcement at the border.
Ambassador, go ahead.
No, on the question of going back, I would just point out that even the Pilgrims of the Mayflower, in 1649, when the Puritan Revolution took place in England, many went back to England and stayed there. So they had that option. Other people haven't had that option. My family came from Cuba, and there has never been an option to really go back in the last 50 years. So not everybody comes under the same conditions or has the same options to return to their